what, just my name?
And I said, hey, I like this. This is fun stuff.
I'm Walter Cho. I have a PhD in biological oceanography from a joint program at MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
My name is Andy Nosal, and I have a PhD in marine biology from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is a grad school of University of California, San Diego.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Mooring, and I have been here at Point Loma for 27 years, something like that. I came from, well, before there, I was at UC Davis, and that's where I got my PhD. So I've got an undergraduate degree in environmental population and organismic biology, or EPO biology as we call it, from CU Boulder. I got a master's and a PhD in animal behavior from the Animal Behavior Graduate Group at UC Davis. And then I did 3 postdocs, one in South Africa at the University of, where was that? No. Oh man, how could I? Anyway, someplace there, and then in University of Alberta in Alberta, Canada, and then at UC Davis again.
There's a lot of reasons why I think people might want to go to grad school. Certainly you'd want to learn more about a particular subject matter in a particular field. Grad school is a time to become a specialist, become an expert in a field. Grad school is also a time to really learn how to be a scientist, how to ask lots of questions, take ownership of research projects, and contribute knowledge. And sometimes there are practical reasons to go to grad school as well. Some professions offer a sizable pay bump if you have a master's degree, for instance. And depending on what profession you aspire to, some professions require a minimum certain degree. Maybe it requires a PhD. And so depending on what your career goals are, there could be practical reasons for a grad degree as well.
To go to grad school, there could be a lot of different motivations. I think one, you have to really have a genuine interest, passion, curiosity for what you're studying, because it's going to be a lot of work, a big commitment of your time and your effort and period of your life to focus on a very specific question. And you could honestly put as much work in something else and probably make a lot more money and a lot shorter time span than you would if you went to grad school. So there's got to be some other kind of motivation or driving passion that's leading you there. For me personally, like when I came into undergrad, I was a pre-med. I thought I was going to be a doctor. And I realized kind of about halfway through that really wasn't a passion for my own life. It was really something that other people had kind of put on me. And as I prayed about it and thought about it, I realized what I really liked was what I was actually doing. I was actually doing undergraduate research with my academic advisor, who was also a marine biologist doing population genetics. And I found it fascinating and really interesting. And after a lot of prayer, a lot of talking with mentors and friends, I realized that's kind of where God was calling me. And so that's why I went to graduate school.
So, and a lot of the way I think about this is in terms of my own experience, of course, because I can't speak to anyone else's experience. And my experience is I wanted to do research. I really fell in love with field research. I did an honors project as an undergraduate in Boulder, studying mule deer in the foothills there. And I said, hey, I like this. This is fun stuff. I actually got a publication as an undergraduate. So I said, this is good. I want to keep doing this. I want to grow in this. And so I asked around, and I was told, you need to get a PhD. There are probably people out in the world who they want to get an advanced degree because there's some future reward. This is going to, be my entree into the business world, or this is going to allow me to have the credentials to start my own .com, or, fill in the blank. But I would say in general, and so that's valid, but I would say in general, if you don't have a passion and a love and a desire to do this, and it's an intrinsic part of what's driving you, then you probably shouldn't be doing a program, because it's hard. If you like, organizing logistics, if you like communicating, if you like writing, if you like designing, elegant experiments, if you like being out in the wild and hiking and being with, the critters, and, in my case, in my particular discipline, if you love all the different elements, if you like doing the statistics and the data processing and all this stuff, if all those elements, or most of those elements, you find enjoyable, then that's probably where you should, what you should be doing. But if you it's like, I hate that stuff, well, probably it's not for you. You'll be miserable. So don't do that.
Generally, if you're interested in doing your own independent research and not really answering to a supervisor, being able to define your own path, then you probably need a PhD. This would apply if you want to be a professor, for instance, or a researcher at a big research institution. However, if you're interested in doing research and you're okay having a supervisor, then perhaps a master's is all you need. Or if you want to teach at a community college, then perhaps a master's will do it. Although some fields are becoming so competitive now that maybe a master's isn't enough, and so you might consider a PhD to have that competitive edge. There are research career paths that do not require any teaching. However, a lot of them do require some teaching, and that's part of the enterprise of science. It's communicating the results to different audiences, including students.
If you want to be your own investigator and you want to do your own research, you need to get a PhD. Whether you're going to go into academia, in most cases, requires that you have a PhD, or if you're going to go into, say, an NGO, a conservation organization that does its own research. If you wanted to be a biology, the biologist for a national wildlife refuge, for example, that would be doing applied conservation work, then you would want to get a master's degree. Why? Because if you had a PhD, you would be overqualified. You couldn't get that job. You'd be like, okay, you too much. So master's would be appropriate. If you wanted to be a professor at, Point Loma Nazarene University or some other university, you would want to get a PhD. And so it just depends what you want to do.
Yeah, I think what's really helpful is getting some kind of research experience as an undergraduate. And whether that's doing a formal research program, REU, research experience for undergraduates in your summer after your junior year, whether it's the PLNU summer research program, some kind of research program, independent research Bio 4099 independent research class, or a senior honors thesis. So you get a sense of what research is like. Can you envision yourself doing that for the rest of your life? Are you interested in that?
As an undergraduate, I had to take out loans. I didn't have a whole lot of loans. There was a lot more funding for higher ed back in my day, but I had loans to pay back and so forth. When I went to grad school, I applied for competitive fellowships and I got them. And so I had my way paid. I actually had to I had to put myself out to get a TA-ship because I wanted that experience. But usually most programs in my area, they offer some kind of financial aid, and usually it's a TA-ship. But you might have to work, wait tables. You might have to, deliver Amazon. You might have to be a barista, something like that. I did a lot of work study as well. So I had work study, I had scholarships, I had a fellowship. That's as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. So yeah, you might have to do that. But you're probably going to come out owing less than if you went to med school, I would guess, because there is some kind of provision for financial aid in these programs. They know that not everyone can just pay everything out of pocket.
When it comes to paying for grad school, it depends on the degree usually. For a PhD, you should not be paying for that. They should be paying you. And in fact, they are not going to accept you unless they have the money to support you. The ways that you get this support, you have a couple of options. One, you could try to apply for a fellowship. If you get a fellowship, for example, the Graduate Research Fellowship from National Science Foundation, they are going to not only pay you a stipend every year, it's a small salary, it's not a lot, but it's plenty, it's certainly enough to live on. And you're going to get tuition remission, which means you're not going to have to pay tuition. So if you can land one of these independent fellowships, you write your own ticket. You can go wherever you want. They're going to be fighting over you at different schools. Okay? Otherwise, you want to be asking your would-be advisors, do they have a grant? Are they planning to apply for grants that is going to include funding for a grad program or grad student? A lot of times they have what's called a research assistantship or an RA-ship, where they may have an ongoing project that has funding to pay somebody to help with that project, and that can help offset the cost of your graduate degree. Something similar to that would be a teaching assistantship, a TA-ship, where the school will pay their grad students to help teach some courses or maybe some labs, and that will help offset the cost of your degree. So for a PhD, you should not be going into debt. Master's degrees are a little bit different. There's more variation. Some master's degree, you got to pay out of pocket. There's really not much internal support, but you'll know that going into it. If it's something you're willing to do, you make that decision. But master's degrees that are a little bit more research focused will tend to have similar opportunities, maybe research assistantships, teaching assistantships, that may not pay for the entire degree, but will make it a lot more reasonable.
So if it's a PhD program, you should have full tuition remission. You should probably get a modest stipend, maybe enough to live on, not necessarily. And that's going to be covered by either research assistantships or teaching assistantships. So you will have to TA, be a teaching assistant in a couple of classes or labs, or you might just get a research assistantship where they're paying for you to do research in the lab. Sometimes related with your degree, sometimes not. It might actually be somewhere else. In master's programs, master's only programs, there may be some limited funding, teaching assistantships or research assistantships, but they may be much more limited. And so you may actually have to pay out of pocket for some of those. But typically in the research fields, research-based degrees, you usually wouldn't be paying for your degree.
Okay, so the way you actually begin is you look in the area. I mean, nowadays, it's easy peasy because we've got the internet, and you just go online and you search for graduate programs. And basically, you spend a lot of time online looking at specifically labs. And so there are definitely sites where you can get lists or links or resources that it'll direct you to. But you can also just do your own search. Go to schools that you're interested in. And in my field, really what you do is you have a campaign. You find labs that are doing interesting work and you start emailing them, and you devise a very succinct and kind of compact, dense, and fairly short presentation in an email. Here's who I am. This is what I'm interested in. I love your research. I've read 3 of your papers, and I'm interested in, seeing if you have any openings in your lab for a graduate student. I'd love to work with you. Essentially, that's what you're going to do. And you're going to craft that kind of email, and you're going to send it out. And if you don't hear back, maybe you'll send a follow-up email, and hopefully they'll respond. And if it all kind of comes together and the stars align, then maybe you'll have a Zoom call and have basically an interview. And then if they're interested, you would go and see them in person. So it really is a campaign. But in some cases, you might have a shotgun approach where I've had a friend who, basically went to every school in the country and, had about a dozen different applications out. So but basically, that's the campaign, and it really is a campaign. It's a lot of work.
Google, that's the way most people do it these days. That and word of mouth, right? You asking around, trying to find what opportunities are out there. Applying for grad school, depending on the program, is quite different from applying for an undergraduate degree. In many ways, you really want to apply to an advisor, your supervisor. And so you'll have an interest in a particular field, and so you're going to be searching for researchers out there that do research that you're interested in being a part of and maybe carving out your own independent project. As to what school they happen to be based at, that may not be a big part of your decision. It seems to me that the most important part of choosing a grad program and even choosing where to apply to one is who your advisor is going to be, because they can make or break your grad school experience. Obviously, you want a program that's in a field that you are so interested in, one that you can see yourself thinking about all the time, asking tons of questions, getting excited about. Beyond that, you want to choose a good advisor. And so you want to pick somebody who's doing work that you could see yourself doing. Of course, you want to ask their current students and maybe recent graduates, what kind of advisor are they? Because you don't just want a supervisor, you want someone who's going to be your mentor and your advocate, who's going to have your back and treat you well. And I think another criteria is you want to ask the sometimes hard question of what kind of funding is available. Because most grad programs will not accept you unless they have at least a couple of years of funding for you. Most grad programs will expect you at the time of application to have identified one or more advisors, potential advisors. These are faculty, researchers in the program that ideally you will have already communicated with and establish that, yes, they're interested, they're in accepting students, and they're willing to consider your candidacy. And so what that means is that the first step is not applying, per se. The first step is reaching out and establishing contact with potential advisors. And that means sending a short professional email to them, expressing your interest, introducing yourself, and asking, do they have funding, and are they planning to take graduate students in the upcoming cycle? When applying for grad school, you got to be persistent. When you first reach out to professors to inquire if they're going to be taking any students or they have funding, you should be prepared, unfortunately, to not hear back from maybe half of them. You have to imagine being in that person's shoes. You're getting tons of emails, lots of inquiries, you're busy teaching, doing research, writing grants, traveling, going to conferences. You may not hear back from half of them. And it's okay to follow up with them. You got to be prepared to do that. And of the half that you do hear back from, don't be surprised if most of them don't have funding or are not taking students, because not everybody takes students every single year. So you should be willing to reach out to many different places. You need to be prepared for plan B, plan C, and just don't be discouraged. And sometimes it takes a year or two to actually be successful and get into a program that you really like. That's just part of the game.
One, they need to figure out what they want to study. And they don't need to be very specific on this. Just generally what field, what parts, what subdisciplines were you really interested in, or could really see yourself spending hours and hours just reading about or learning about. Because actually going to a different program will vary, again, depending on discipline. Now, I'm more knowledgeable about the ecology-related disciplines. I'll talk about those. For applying to graduate schools for ecology-related disciplines, one consideration is funding is much more limited. So you typically have to find the PI, the principal investigator that you're going to work with, and confirm that they have funding for you and space in their lab. So even if you apply to a program, they love you, but if they don't have the funding, they're not going to accept you. So to apply to ecology-related degrees, typically you are contacting the PIs before you even graduate. I usually tell my students probably summer before they enter their senior year. They should be researching labs that they want to look into, that they may want to work with. They can just start looking at schools and department lists, look at their faculty research pages, and figure out who is actually doing the things that they're very interested in. And then they need to contact them. And they need to send out emails, very polite, respectful emails, but send out a lot of emails, because in reality, these scientists are really busy. And although they may want to reply to everyone, they just can't. And so you send out dozens of emails, and after a couple of weeks, you might send up a follow-up email as well, very respectfully. And if you send out a couple dozen, you might get 2 or 3 responses. It's just kind of a good yield rate. And if in those emails, you're letting them know that you're approaching graduation, you're interested in graduate school, and you're let them know a little bit about your interests and your background, and also why you think their lab is a good match for you, or why you are a good match for their lab. And if they have space or funding, then they'll probably come back with other questions, and you can follow up on conversations that way. So especially for ecology-related programs, like you can't even apply really, or on the application, they often ask you, who have you contacted? Who have you talked to list that. One thing that's important in choosing a program is don't get caught up in geography or in reputation of a school, because once you get to graduate school, the university doesn't matter, where you are doesn't matter. It's really the principal investigator, the person you're working with, what they're studying, what they're doing, because they can be anywhere in the world and do something. So that you could have very famous, well-respected marine biologists in the middle of the country, because they just go out into the field to collect their data and they analyze everything back in lab. So don't feel like you have to be in particular cities or places. And if you're expecting a career further in academia, you really can't get caught up in where you're going to be, because you basically go to wherever the positions are. There are not a ton of positions in academia and in research, and so there are not a slew of positions opening up every year. So you just have to keep a lookout and find what opens up wherever it may be and go there. In addition to that, one other piece of advice is that there are other potential funding opportunities that you can apply to as a undergrad and as a graduate student. So as an undergraduate, even before you go into graduate school, if you know you're going, you can apply. So there are graduate fellowships from the NSF, National Science Foundation. NOAA will have some. I think the EPA has some. A bunch of other government agencies, and also some private funded graduate fund fellowships as well. So you just have to search depending on what discipline you're in to see what's available. If you can get one of those even before getting to graduate school, that makes you much more marketable as a graduate student, because who's going to turn away a student who comes with their own funding? But even in graduate school, you can also apply for those as well.
Obviously, you want to make sure it's something that you're really interested in. I really think the most important thing to consider, based on my own experience, is how will you get along with the major professor, with your advisor? How do you get along? And so I think what's really important is to know that it's someone that you can get along well with, that you resonate with, and that you're going to spend some time with.
I always tell my students who are thinking about graduate school, you're gonna get to a point in your graduate studies, probably about 2 or 3 years in, you're gonna have no work-life balance. You're gonna be spending a lot of time in the lab or in the field collecting data, analyzing samples, and you're gonna look around and look at your peers, and they're going to be probably have a permanent job. They are probably making more money than you. They're probably maybe starting families or buying houses, reaching these life goals that you might think of, and you're still in school. At that point, if you don't have that underlying reason of why you're there, then it's going to be hard to continue. And so I always try to help my students think about that, so that they really know that it is a long commitment with a lot of work and effort. But if you have that passion or that vocation or that calling from God even to do that, then that will help you get through that kind of hump that usually happens around the middle.
There's no doubt that grad school is tough. You have to have perseverance. You've got to be self-motivated. You have to just love the subject area that you're in. You got to love science. You got to love being a scientist, because you're going to have setbacks. This is normal. Science rarely works the way you think it's going to work, and you have to be okay with that. And the other thing is, grad school is a huge commitment, and once you've started and you've invested the time, you want to finish it if you can, right? There are certainly times where, there's emergencies and life circumstances where you have to, pause or back out, but it's tough, and it's tough to get back in. So again, you don't really want to embark on this commitment unless you can see the end and you can see yourself finishing it.